The ideas that gave birth to our nation are the ideas that our nation is resistant to right now, and we should talk about that all the time.
In a world where narratives are shaped by corporations and gatekeepers, independent voices matter more than ever. Badlands Media brings together citizen journalists, researchers, and independent thinkers.
The truth is triggering.
Question the narrative. Explore the facts.
It's authenticity, courage, resilience.
Search for the truth others won't.
It's not about being first or being right.
The information war is changing.
It's about being authentic.
Embrace the friction.
Embrace the friction.
Shut the f*** up.
Authentically antagonizing. Join the movement.
I'm going to say how I feel.
Follow Badlands Media.
This is about the future.
The Badlands. What are the Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
What's up, guys? Welcome to The Narrative, episode 75. This one is called The Dirty Break. And that's not a term that I invented. It's actually a term that I recently came across in my perusing of the media terrain, of the propaganda terrain. I had never heard this term before. I don't know if it's new or not. I think it's fairly new, but I think it's a really interesting concept, and I'm going to talk about it tonight with my guest in the context in which I saw it. Then we're going to apply that context to a second and a third topic. It's a pretty interesting one. Even rewatching the intro to this show for now the 75th time, all these pieces of fiction, genre fiction, and these quotes that we threaded throughout the intro, I was thinking a lot of them kind of apply to what we're talking about here. Especially, you get that little section with Morpheus. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, and sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them. So we're peaceful here, of course. We're peaceful warriors. So we're going to fight them rhetorically by making incredible analogies, mostly Lord of the Rings themed tonight, I'm guessing. But yeah, this should be a fun one. Before I bring my guest in, I am actually going to thank our sponsor right away. And that is our prime sponsor for tonight's show, our friends over at Luv Litters. Tired of heavy, dusty, smelly cat litter that tracks everywhere and fills your house with odor? Discover Luv Litters, the long-lasting wood-based litter made from pure kiln-dried wood with no chemicals or additives. It's eco-friendly, repurposing wood that would otherwise go to a landfill. And here's why it's so great. It completely neutralizes cat urine odors. You just scoop the solids daily, flush them, and the urine simply evaporates with zero smell. A single 45-pound box can last one cat 6 to 9 months. When used at about an inch deep, it turns into fine sawdust over time, so there's minimal tracking and less mess to clean. Do you have birds? Luv Litters is aggressively absorbent. It dries droppings instantly to prevent mold and dissolves harmlessly if your bird nibbles it. Plus, it works wonderfully for ferrets, rabbits, reptiles, and more. Customers who switch from clay litter say they'll never go back, loving the fresh pine scent, ease of use, and how clean their homes stay. If you're ready to kick the clay habit for good, head to badlandsmedia.tv/litter for free shipping and try Luv Litters. Your pets and your nose will thank you. That's badlandsmedia.tv/litter. And these guys were also featured. They've been to several GARTs, longtime supporters of ours. They were featured on episode 7 of John's Sunday show, America First Stories, where he spotlights some of our longtime Badlands supporters. I am a user of these products and have been a user of these types of products for a while because I'm the rare guy who is a cat guy and a dog guy. And my cat annoys me less these days, even though I love both of them. Never thought I'd say that. But yeah, you got to get away from clay litter. It's nasty stuff. And you'll only recognize it once you go to something like Luv Litters. Okay, on that note, let me bring in, I was looking for somebody. I could have had this conversation with a few people. Ash talks about political parties and that kind of thing. But I wanted to just get somebody who would just simp super hard for the government so that I could play, the opposite. I could steel man the sort of anti-government approach. So I thought, who is the most system-focused, non-contrarian, just go along to get along voice at Badlands. And that's the guy who leads into the narrative on Sunday nights, John Drake. How's it
That's
going,
quite
government simp?
Quite an introduction. I think my wife might disagree with you.
Yeah.
As I told everyone just a little bit ago, if I've not been called asshole at least once per day, I've done something wrong.
Well, that's the plan tonight. So let's just get right into it, because you and I, just like, a growing contingent at Badlands of verbose people. It somehow shocks John Harold that, like, each new voice he adds to Badlands, he's like, why do these guys talk so much? I don't know, John. You found semi-autistic, obsessive personality types who have lots of ideas, and you brought them onto a network specifically to talk about things. But other than that, I can't imagine why we talk so much. But I wanted to, I actually, in all seriousness, thought Drake would be a great guest for this conversation. Originally, full disclosure, I have a little document of like ideas for the narrative, because the narrative is, a more conversational show rather than a presentation necessarily most of the time. And I'll kind of like have these ideas of what would make a good conversation rather than a good article that I'm working on, or something that's just like a solo deep dive. And I'll usually put one or two Badlanders next to that concept in my planner of like, who do I think this topic would be good to discuss with? And sometimes the episodes of the narrative are directly inspired by whoever my guest is. This dirty break concept is one I've been thinking about for a few weeks, ever since I came across it, I think about a month ago or 3 weeks ago in the battle space. Originally, I was going to have this conversation with Ash, but the closer I get, and obviously Ash will be back. She was on here a month ago. She'll be back on again with a different topic, I'm sure. But I've mentioned this on the Power Hour. I've mentioned it on a few shows, and I did a little bit of deep diving on my Substack on it in the last couple of weeks. But I really thought Drake would be a great foil for this conversation, because while the concept of the dirty break I saw in a partisan political framework, that's where I came across it. I thought it will function as a great way to diagnose what are they doing in the partisan political realm, and then is this one of those oddly first principles type concepts that we can sort of use and apply to probably to a situation they would utterly hate, all of the people who are using this term. But before we get into it, before I had brought this specific term up to you in DMs, a week ago, had you ever come across this or heard of this concept?
No, primarily because I mean, this is somewhat Chris Paul's fault as well. Trying to track political party, drama is not very interesting to me. Which I should probably pay more attention to that sort of thing, but understanding them, which I think that an angle that would be interesting to kind of explore is like, what you're presenting, what does that mean in the context of a uniparty?
Right.
And that, it would then strike me as more just drama to try to get attention that might be the flailing attempts at a dying system to get attention. But yeah, I hadn't really come across it before. I mean, I'm aware of the various factions that we'll end up discussing, and aware of the tensions within the parties, and certainly you have the old guard, and then the rhinos, and you have the old guard Democrats. But in kind of preparing for this a little bit, I have some lines of thought that I've not really been working on, but have been sort of rattling around in my brain as far as how political parties have shifted and changed in this country in general, especially in the last 20 years. And that's some stuff that we can get into, because I think it's probably like you're thinking like birth pangs, like little tinges over the decades that sort of indicate an overall shift, which ties into a larger framework of how I view reality as a whole, that I think it has explanatory power in what we'll end up discussing.
Yeah, and obviously you guys are the third part of the show. Send over any rants or boosts you have. I saw there's already some in there, so we'll get to those a little bit later on. But just as I'm going to kind of intro what this concept is, where I came across it, and we can obviously rabbit trail on this show. That's what the whole thing is about. But generally speaking, for you guys to know, We're going to kind of start by mostly focusing on the quote-unquote left. We are talking about political parties tonight, but we're going to try to make this not dry and political party focused, even though that's what the topic is. We're going to start kind of on the left side of the aisle. We're going to kind of shift focus to the right, and then we're going to take aim at the uniparty type of construct, maybe the false centrist construct, the governmental construct in general for the second half of the show. But I'll show you guys where I came across this. I've been saying recently, I mean, for years, I've told this audience in particular, my number one mode of operation in the info war, when I became conscious that I am intentionally trying to figure out what's going on with the full understanding several years ago because of the drops, because of the advent of Donald Trump, okay, the media is lying to us. There is clearly way more going on than partisan politicking on the political level. There's clearly way more going on than just media apparatus or media outlets and journalists having their own biases as people, which, I had been disillusioned more than 10 years ago from politics, but not because I thought it was all quite as rigged and planned and engineered as I now know it to be, and as we all know it to be. So now when I'm looking across the battle space when it comes to the media, I'm looking at these people as either witting or unwitting, basically mass psychological combatants, informational combatants. That could mean sometimes they're for us, sometimes they're against us, but either way, they have agendas that are far beyond writing headlines. The Atlantic, I've told people, has kind of taken the cake for me. They've always been signal focused, but they're like, if you guys are going to take a quick peruse on a weekly basis across the sort of propaganda space to see what their macro concepts are that they're trying to engineer, even though the Atlantic, I think I've looked them up, they're like top 30 in terms of news traffic. They're definitely not one of the big dogs like the New York Times and CNN and Fox and all that. But they are what you will see printed in the Atlantic 3 months later will end up making waves in far more public either scandals or op-eds or media deployments from the mainstream media. They often have quote-unquote guest writers who are part of US intel, part of NGOs, part of foreign governments. They'll have, foreign ministers and secretaries of state write for them, just like The Economist does in the financial realm. So all of which is just to preface, when I see a concept in the Atlantic, I take it as sort of beta testing, and I look at the Atlantic as an outlet wherein the deep state or the globalist propaganda network is sort of talking to each other. They're talking to themselves, and they're kind of coming to some form of condensed consensus that then they beta test these ideas and see which ideas propagate. So that's my premise. And when was this published? July 1st, just about a month ago. I saw this come across my feed. There's nothing democratic about these socialists. The DSA was formed in opposition to the very thing it has become. So this is by Jonathan Chait. This is about, obviously, the Democratic Socialists of America. People in this audience probably have noticed that there is even very publicly a massive divide or split going on, at least rhetorically, between the establishment left, as you mentioned, the sort of old guard of the left and Democrat Party, and the new guard, your Zoran Mamdanis, your AOCs, ironically, Bernie Sanders type of contingent. We can talk about that. But the title of this episode comes from a term that was buried in this one that I had never heard. So, because I think it is new. The DSA's long-term strategy is to exploit the Democratic Party's ballot access and reservoir of voters to build its following, and then, after it gains enough power, break off to form its own party, after which the husk of the old Democratic Party would wither and die. This gambit is called the dirty break, a term coined by a 2017 article in the left-wing magazine Jacobin. So that's pretty funny right there. Not all DSA officials agree on the dirty break. Some still cling to Harrington's vision of pushing the Democrats leftward. Others favor an immediate split into a third party, a clean break. But as Peter Stern, a one-time DSA member who now reports on New York politics, has written, the DSA's current strategy is a dirty break. Gradually build up the necessary party-like infrastructure to eventually break away from the Democrats entirely while still running candidates in Democratic primaries for now. In the meantime, the organization has displayed patience. So we don't have to go through that whole thing. But that may not seem like totally shocking to people, that there are these extreme wings of the partisan political system that are trying to grift off of the establishment party. I don't think that's the new concept. What's kind of interesting to me is that they're talking about this openly. In the current narrative battle space, we don't have a situation going on where we have a unity push by the left. We have an basically open political warfare on the left side of the aisle. And now you've got these media types who seem to me to be kind of hedging on one side or the other and saying they know that the DSA narrative, at least, is maybe way more prevalent than they thought it was going to be a few years ago. And those are just kind of some leadoff thoughts just to let people know. I think it's fascinating to apply this concept to some other things we'll talk about tonight. But I guess just on the surface, when you see that, how they're framing it, how the socialists are framing it themselves, and how the establishment left side of the partisan political aisle is reacting to this framing.
Well, it's interesting too that the lead up to even that term first being coined in 2017, and then as it has developed up until today, they were adopting the strategy of pushing the party left already, not necessarily like kind of explicit, like, Bernie Sanders and those guys. I mean, it makes sense to try to co-opt a political infrastructure that already exists with your. I mean, we talk about that, people talk about that at Badlands, Mo Benson and others, like taking over the Republican Party, infrastructure. So it kind of seems like the DSA is trying to do the same thing. But, when you go back over the last 15 years or so of the way that the culture has been pushed further and further extreme, with the cancel culture and, the whole wee-wees and hoo-ha's thing and all that kind of stuff, you can see how they have sort of prepped the ground for something like this happening. And I mean, I actually pulled up, I can't remember if it was linked in that article or not, but it was like a platform list from the DSA. And you read through the things and, it's the type of stuff you see at all the different protests. And it's also stuff that has been championed by big name Democrats in the past, like, getting rid of the electoral college and trying to make it more people directly having influence over their government, which at face value, the reason why I think that they're even gaining steam is because the things they're talking about abolish the carceral state, like getting rid of just all this, jailing people for stupid stuff, cutting back on the Department of War. They want to abolish the Senate. Like most of the things I read on here, I'm like, yeah, I agree with most of this stuff. I mean, you can see then how they've tapped into real feelings of people, and which makes it a very emotional thing. And it's very clear as we discuss also on the Republican side of things, it's clear that there is a new generation that's coming in, and the older generation that recognizes the momentum is getting on board now, but eventually it is going to come to a head. And they're just going to try to take over entirely. And we'll see what ends up happening with that. It might end up just causing a complete implosion of the Democratic Party system as we know it, which I think would be okay.
Well, and it's so funny. So I'll bring up another article. And at the time I saved this, I just hadn't really filed away. I don't pay that much attention to the specific writers unless there's somebody very notable. I really just kind of pay attention to the outlet, what the outlet tends to represent, and then what the headline and what the narrative deployment is. But it's always interesting when you find like, oh, this is that same guy. So given what you just said and given what I introduced of the dirty break, coming back into the fore. The Atlantic published another article on July 22nd, so 21 days after this one, written by Jonathan Chait. And he says now that he's had 21 days to think about it, he says abolishing the Senate might be the DSA's best idea. A teardown of the upper chamber would be good for the American democracy. So I'll read just the first two graphs here. The Republican Party and its allied media organs have been blasting out messaging highlighting the radical views of the Democratic Socialists of America, whose views conservatives wish to associate with the Democratic Party, which seems to be what Jonathan and others are worried about, a la the first piece. He goes on to say the particular extreme DSA stance they have chosen to highlight over the past week is the abolition of the U.S. Senate. The right-wing media is aflame with headlines such as DSA co-chairman defends plan to abolish Senate. We don't think that's extreme. And it's not extreme. Guess what the DSA wants to abolish now? Answer the Senate. The odd thing about this choice is that although the DSA's platform is indeed chock full of maniacal proposals, on this particular idea, the maniacs have a point. The Senate is a vestigial deformity upon the Constitution, whose elimination, unlikely though it might be, would rank among the great democratic advances in American history. And like, man, if you didn't tell me who wrote that or where that appeared, and if I didn't get the headline, and if I didn't even get the first graph or the next 15 graphs below that, and you just showed me that paragraph, I'd be like, was this John Drake? Or was this Chris Paul? Or was this Spooner? Like, and, you know, I want your thoughts on it, but this is why I hope you guys are starting to see why, as unfocused as I can seem with this topic right now, that kind of started to coalesce as the topic for me in the last couple of weeks, is that the media machine is a consensus formation construct, right? It either already has consensus within itself and is trying to then mirror that outward, or it's trying to form consensus. And before we even get to the right side of the aisle or the MAGA movement and Donald Trump's role in this and our role in this, which we are going to do, just if you stay on the left right now, the same writer, 3 weeks apart, in the same publication, is starting by saying the Democratic Socialists are an existential threat to basically everything that we are. 3 weeks later, but maybe we should abolish the Senate. And I don't know, we can kind of go down like the principles of the argument itself. And then I'm also interested in your take on just this writer as a microcosm of the Democratic, because he seems to consider himself part of sort of the Democrat establishment, who's looking at these newcomers and this threat to him. So what's he doing here? Is he starting to say, hey, these guys have a point, like maybe we should listen to them on a few things? Or is he more recognizing a power game here and saying, these guys are way more powerful than I think the rest of the establishment has figured out. We might have to throw them some bones with some of this stuff.
Not knowing the guy, I'm still quite happy to draw inferences about him just from my own prejudices. I would be shocked if the guy has made a principled decision in his life. So I suspect that his warming to the idea has more to do with, I can see the lions approaching and I'm going to offer them food. Rather than me as the food. So I that would be an easy interpretation of his seeming capitulation. I mean, yeah, it's funny the idea of abolishing the Senate as associating that with me or Chris or whatever, because yeah, absolutely. When you think back what the Senate was originally intended to be, as essentially the aristocracy's voice in the government, that Congress is supposed to be essentially the representative of the people, and that because senators weren't specifically chosen by the people, they were chosen, through different, layers of insulation. There was meant to be the landed elites getting their say in government. This all goes back to a question I pose on my show all the time: representative to what end? Like, what is the purpose that this government is for? And under a natural law perspective, a Senate is entirely unnecessary. If the government is primarily, and that we can get into this stuff a little bit later too, if the government is just primarily the executioner of the law that people have chosen, you don't need to have tribunals that laws have to be created in and then pass. So a Senate becomes, I mean, I can easily make the argument that the Senate is not a necessary body. And this is where the Democratic Socialists and I would arrive at the same conclusion, but for completely different reasons. Because I obviously don't agree with their fundamental, they're essentially a majority rule, because they want, representative government on a very individual level. And all you got to do is just line everybody up and count, and who has the most, that's what's right. That's a majority rule system. That's a moral relativist system. So in the interest of liberty, that's not good. And I'd be really, really careful in aligning myself or trying to, ally with them in thinking that we can somehow achieve the same end, because their end is not liberty. Their end is just control. And having, of course, they shroud it in the euphemism of democratic socialism as somehow the individual peon is going to have a say, but that's not going to happen, just based on their ideology. So I don't think that seeing this is a good thing, like seeing this turmoil within the Democratic Party on the quote unquote left. It's a wonderful thing, because a house divided against itself will fall. But the enemy of my enemy is not my friend in this case, because they're my enemy, because what they want is fundamentally opposed to our natural rights. And if you were to get in bed with them, you'd sleep with both eyes open, because they'll slit your throat as quick as they possibly can. But it is interesting to watch, and it's interesting to see how the media is. I mean, like you're saying, Atlantic being kind of on, the avant-garde or whatever, seeing how this would play out over the next number of months or years, and seeing those guys who are sort of early buy-ins and seeing what ends up happening to them as far as how they're treated by this growing faction. Or is it even really growing? That's another question too. Is
it just being amplified?
Right. Is this just a way to, like, okay, people aren't really paying attention here, let's throw some dust in the air and make it look like something's happening? That's something you have to take into consideration too, as I channel my my internal Chris Paul.
Yeah, well, paranoia is a feature, not a bug of what we do. But yeah. I totally I like how the way you frame that, especially this sort of sleep with both eyes open sort of thing. And to be clear, I totally agree that we don't want to align ourselves as, principled. And when I say principled, I mean it in both framings of the word. What people who hope to be principled, logically and morally, America first, nationalist, sovereign, Christian, lots of things like that. DSA, Democratic Party, these two things do not align with this view. But I think it's absolutely fascinating to observe that, at least on a narrative level, the Democrat machine, the establishment machine, and when we're saying left and right tonight, in the context of this audience, keep in mind, I mean branding. I'm not we could argue till we're blue in the face about what right wing even means in modern politics. I'm talking about the branding of these political parties. And obviously the Democratic Party brands itself as left. The DSA brands them as not left enough. But it's fascinating to watch that to your point about making a sacrifice to the lions, that is the tone, I think, that we're seeing right now in the establishment left. Now, that's one of two tones. One tone from the establishment left is, what can we give them to go away or to join with us and, lend their power, whatever power they have in the public mind and the public mandate, to the shoring up and boosting of the Democrat brand. That's one tone the establishment is adopting. The other tone the establishment is adopting is all out, batten down the hatches, man the portcullis, like, just get the oil boiling, oil the pitch, and the mongrels are at the gates. And it's fascinating, and I think what's good about this, just on a total macro zooming out view, is that if you picture the Democrat establishment leftoid brand as, in the physical mindscape, it's like this castle It's been there for a long time. It's had renovations. It's been attacked a few times. Sometimes it's seen better days. Other times it's been at the height of its powers. Like under Obama, it was at the height of its power. And of course, by that, I don't mean it was good. I mean that it was a very powerful castle and force on the mindscape. It duped a lot of people in, a lot of earnest, left-minded people went into those gates willingly 20 years ago. And, in recent years under Trump, it is just embattled. It has been besieged. And this is the rare case, I would say, 2026, where instead of like MAGA pitchforks around the Democrat establishment castle, MAGA's kind of just, we sort of moved on. And I even mean normie MAGA. I don't see normie MAGA talking about the left a lot these days. I know some of them do, but it really feels like there's been a phase shift that I think is positive, even though we're not nearly where we need to be from a first principles perspective. But one positive thing with the way Donald Trump, my first analog to him tonight, or reference to him tonight, would be that I think one of the great gifts he has given is this era of mass acceleration and Overton window shifting, where he just pushes that forward post of the Overton window so far that right now it's like, it's almost a normie framework to say lefties went a little crazy over the last 10 years. And right now we're kind of looking out over that mindscape and seeing the Democrat castle, and we're like, oh man, there's people at the gates. There seems to be some fighting going on over there. And it's like, wait a second, isn't that their guys? Like, wasn't that tribe theirs? Weren't they supporting them? And I think that overall is a good place to be. The other point I'd make, to pass it back to you, is that with the Senate argument in particular, you see where they are on such a slippery slope right now. By they, I mean establishment left and the DSA. Anybody on that side is on such a slippery slope right now, because once you start messing around with a first principles argument, you might slide down into first principles arguments.
Right.
So when you're framing an article that way of the Senate basically taking a first principles hatchet to the Senate as a concept, and then you don't apply that to any of the other stuff you're advocating, you start to really, not only are you not going to sell yourself to the mindscape, which is the whole point of politicking in the first place, to get people to buy in to your story, which is what these parties are, they're stories. So this is a rebranding battle that's going on. It's like a new CFO coming in who's got all the new hip lingo, and you got the old CFO who's like, I think we got to stay the course through the social media age, and I think there's going to be backlash to this DEI era. And you got the new guy saying like, we got to get on board, we got to make everything gay, we got to make everything feminist. That seems to be what's going on here. Like, we got to get more left, we got to get extreme. Let's dip our toes into first principles arguments about the nature of the government itself. And then it's like, are you sure you'd like to open that door? So, again, I don't think there's consensus over there. And I don't think that there's any, to your point about the DSA, by no means would I ever want to ally with them, because they might have one first principles argument, and then their next argument is about how they think they should be abolishing or seizing personal property. Right, so definitely do not want to go down that road. But I think it's just a great position for us to be in, where MAGA's like, you guys literally are not powerful enough right now to argue with.
Right.
So you're all basically caught in this Ouroboros loop of whether or not you're going to go more establishment and fake, or start messing around with principled communism. Is
either way their time is up. Do you have a pressure washer?
I do not, but I need one.
Okay, have you ever played around with one?
Yes.
Okay, so this is in connection with first principles. Once you start pressure washing your driveway, you have to finish, because it's like, oh man, that looks so good. And then you're like, wow, look, the rest of that is so dirty. And the next thing you know, 5 hours later, you're soaked and your driveway is spotless. And oh, I missed a spot. And you go back. That's what happens when you start applying first principles to things.
Yeah.
And you either stay the course and you follow it to its logical end, and you wind up listening to the No Treason podcast and reading Spooner in your spare time. Or you go, you know what, I can't do this, and you just I'm comfortable with half of my driveway being clean, but then everybody drives by and goes, man, like that guy started what he should have finished, and didn't finish it. It's interesting over the last however long this stupid DEI and cancel culture and all that kind of stuff, however long that's been going on, it really does seem like it just got kicked into high gear in the last 10 years or so. But even going back to, Obama's era and all that, how the Democratic establishment courted the crazies, made concessions to the crazies, especially once Trump came onto the picture, because it was all hands on deck. So they started giving them that, those concessions and turning everything gay and debating wee-hoos and hoo-haws and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And how that's kind of come around to bite him in the ass a little bit, or a lot. And at the center of that is, shock of all shocks, Donald Trump. Not that he necessarily, and this is the kind of thing where it's like patriots in control, that's obviously comes up. And in some sense, it's kind of like if you just let your enemy be himself, he's going to end up destroying himself, especially because he's not really first principles based. He's not really arguing from any firm standpoint other than we just want power, which really is the American political system. That's all it is. Because I got some points on that we can cover a little bit later as far as how the parties have shifted. You mentioned Obama being like a castle, or the Democratic Party being a castle at that time. It's the same castle that the Republicans are in. The flag just gets changed every now and again. And we get duped into thinking like, wow, this is a completely different castle. No, it's all the same thing, because it's literally the same issues that just 5 years earlier were Republican issues. And then 5 years later are Republican issues again. It's on this weird cycle where they just take turns pushing whatever issue. And then to Chris Paul's point about how the left-right spectrum is really anarchy versus collectivism / statism.
The left spectrum.
The left spectrum. The reason why government keeps growing and keeps getting bigger, and the reason why our liberties keep getting taken away and our taxes keep going up, is because regardless who is in that castle, they're all statists, and statists want more state. It's just a matter of degree to how much state they want, or which facet of the state is going to encroach on this thing, on this, now that we've got the castle, we really like this part. It all still grows, because a point that Spooner makes, one of the farces of suffrage, I love that old-fashioned term for voting, is that you're the person that is running for an election promises to be the savior of whatever, the horrible tyranny that we've been experiencing. But once they get in power, they don't ever really peel back those layers that got added. They add their own new layers. And so, I'll just wait till the next election, and wait till the next election. And every time, because as a statist, you're voting in more statists, even assuming elections are real. And they're just going to keep adding to that layer. So it's interesting to see, like, again, over the last 10 or 15 years, how into seeking just to get that power back, that really is it. There is no principle in politics other than power. That's it. So what we're seeing is one side kind of trying to restructure. They're fragmenting. They're trying to find any source of power, because power ultimately is collective. Because this is a point I've been making on my show that is something that I've sort of extracted out of Spooner's Science of Justice essay that I'm going through currently, that the basis of legitimate government is that the authority of the individual is the predicate for the authority of the government. There is no new authority discovered by collecting together. There's just new power. Because I have my natural rights. I get those by virtue of being born. But I, as an individual, am weak. I'm not fast enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm not smart enough. So in order to protect my rights, which is what I may do, not what I can do, but what I may do, in order to protect those, I get together with my neighbors and we form a government. But on an individual level, I have the same authority that we do as a collective. But in a majority rule system that's not based on actual principle, the only principle is to get that power, because that's where they derive their authority, which isn't real authority. It's a sham, and it's just tyranny. It's usurpation. And that's That's why you end up seeing people fighting so hard and pretending like they have principles when in actuality they don't. Because looking at this, at the platform of the DSA, there's not a single thing in there about where they believe their motivation and justification for doing. Like, what does it matter?
Yeah, who are you doing this for? What is your projected end state? How do you purport to represent the people? All these kind of branding. How are you translating your story? And I agree with that. And I think that's one of the interesting things. And again, from an accelerationist perspective, which is certainly one of the ways I would describe myself, it's probably the term that is used most often in the Badlands Substack, the brief and the blitz that myself, Ash, and Ghost, co-manage together. We use the term acceleration all the time. And you mentioned Donald Trump. And again, in the context of just the left side of the story, the left side of the war stories right now, he absolutely plays a massive role here. And, I also think I kind of break the Trump era into a few different parts. And of course, you can do that by administrations and terms. You can talk about the first, second, and third term, and maybe the fourth term to come. But I even mean just
or no
in terms
term,
of
just perpetual term.
Oh yeah, I'm okay with that. Hey, we got to talk about that in another episode, 2028 and beyond. The return of the Anglo-Saxons. Trump may be our only hope. But I like, one of the ways I like looking at the story of Donald Trump, the era of Trump or the age of Trump, and starting in 2015-16, I think is obviously when that kicked off in the way that we understand it. I like to look at the different acts of Trump as who he is focusing on. What part of the story is he concentrating fire on? And, one way of looking at Trump as a narrative war master, as I've called him for a long time now, half a decade, is Trump himself concentrates rhetorical fire on a specific story. And he does this on the micro every day, specific figures, specific policies, specific enemies. But he does this on the macro, where he picks factions. He picks very famous individuals who represent factions. But really what he concentrates fire on is concepts. That's what he concentrates fire on. One of the interesting things I think about the age of Trump is that he does stand for things. I think he was actually somewhat rare in American politics in our lifetimes, in that he wasn't just running against things, although he was running against things, which most politicking, to your point about power, most of the stories of politicking, which is what campaigning is, right? It's just telling stories and selling stories to the American people, is all about what you're going to stop from happening and what you're going to destroy and dismantle. It's very rarely about what you're going to build or do. And Trump, I think, brilliantly, took rebranded the Reagan brand and understood that, hey, I'm going to concentrate fire on a lot of things that I think we need to destroy and dismantle. But the Trump story is synonymous with MAGA. And MAGA is actually a story. It's a macro concept of building something. There is a vision at the beginning of saying, the argument is, I, Donald Trump, am claiming that we as a people were great and that we can be again. And then we can debate the nuances of that. And I think that's where a lot of the fun is. But I think there is a brilliance to that of setting a foundation, like, I'm building something. We're building something. But that something is something that we had, or at least we were closer to in a previous iteration of our story. And in order to get to that, there's a bunch of shit that's been piled up on top of that story that we got to start dismantling. And when I say concentrating fire, I think Trump concentrated fire on the left story in the first term. It was the media industrial complex, fake news. It was the Democrat Party. It was modern liberalism. And I would say he has shifted his target and his focus in the second term, which we can get to in a little bit, on the right side of the story and the uniparty dynamics. But I think that's one of, when I use the term acceleration and everything, to your point about Patriot control and all that, yeah, I think the age of Trump was coordinated. I think it was engineered. I think there's obviously military planning behind it on an actual level. But on a narrative level, to your point, if you take away Patriot control on a literal level, 5GW level, just look at Donald Trump as a story and as a force of narrative nature. Just by existing in the way he does, the battle space has had to orient itself around him as the new center of gravity. And I think he actually did a great job, ironically, of basically saying this at the White House Correspondents' Dinner on Friday night, where he was joking around with the media and saying, you guys are going to miss me when I'm gone. You're all going to be out of jobs when I'm gone. And we chuckle at it and, oh, it's the fake news media. But if you really think about what he's saying on like a macro, mass psychological level, I think he's absolutely right. And I think he is aware that the story of Trump has been so in your face for the last 10 years that all political argument is being orbited and passed around the gravitational pull of the story and the arguments of Trump in the last decade, and probably for the foreseeable future. Any leftoid that comes onto the battle space for the next 20 years is going to be compared to Trump.
Yeah.
And anybody on the right side of the ledger is also going to be compared to Trump. And I don't mean by the establishment, I mean by the American people, of saying, what was that guy saying was important? And what are you saying was important?
Yeah. Yeah. And talking about acceleration, whether this was intentional or not, I would suspect it is. The fact that we're even having a conversation about a potential dirty break is because Trump using that gravitational pull has forced the left to align themselves initially with groups like the DSA and with your what's her face, donkey face, AOC, and AOC. You know, and to align themselves with policies that just 10 years earlier, really, they were against, like open immigration. I mean, everyone has heard clips of of the Clintons and even Barack Obama talking about how you just can't let people in here, and now they're just openly embracing what the DSA, one of their things is abolish ICE and grant amnesty for all. That's suicide, utter suicide. Although I actually agree, there's the whole concept of immigration being illegal is something that I think natural law completely dispels. There's other ways to protect your culture than having a fiat standard, but that's a whole nother conversation. But Trump has essentially forced that craziness to accelerate, specifically on the left. I think it's also working on the right, but it's interesting to see because they're Ouroboros. They're eating themselves alive. They're committing suicide by taking positions that no one actually wants, which is why in thinking through, I mentioned the comment earlier, how much of this is actually reflective of what's happening on the ground versus this is just a media construct. And they are so in their own bubble that they're literally willing to self-destruct, thinking they represent the people, when in actuality, they're just their own ivory tower that's crumbling. Yeah, it's hard to say for sure, but it's interesting to think about.
Well, to further that point, I think we mentioned, I think we've covered pretty well the couple readings of the left side of the ledger here. One of them being invite the mongrels in, invite the lions in, give them a little bit of meat, make them happy. But again, that's maybe not even what the majority of the liberal establishment is doing. The majority of the liberal establishment, or at least the ones with the biggest voices, are saying, get out of here. Scram, kids, get out of here. Actually,
well, okay.
Go ahead.
To that point, so a friend of mine down the street, I call him my fast food friend, because like he just wants to have a good time and drink beer and sit around a fire and talk about sports and fun stuff. Doesn't really ever want to talk about anything serious. So it's like he's a good guy. I enjoy talking to him, but we're not going to sit down and have a conversation about stuff that I care about. You can just, as we start getting into those realms, you can tell he just gets real fidgety. And so, but he made a point one time we were talking about politics. He's a Trump guy. His wife's kind of left wing, so she's hates Trump, and her whole family's lefty, and so he's always talking about that. But he's like, 20 years ago, I identified myself as a Democrat. He's like, I haven't changed we talked about this before. I haven't changed my views on anything. The Democrats have left me behind, and now I find myself more aligned with what Republicanism is, which is interesting on what has happened to the Democratic Party and what's happened to the Republican Party as well. I think your average run of the mill, Republican normie be like, good, we got another guy on our side. It's like, no, you guys moved to the point where you now encompass the guy that used to be your mortal enemy.
Right.
And so that's an indication of the shift and the change, which looking back over, I had Claude pull up for me just examples. I was like, okay, here's the basic theory that, parties essentially, because it's a power struggle, it's not really based on principle. And they use the word principled conservative. But what it really means is we really want to get that power back. And here's how we figure out ways to do that. Just looking at the last 30 years, things that previously were Democrat issues or Republican issues, for instance, war and foreign policy. Right after 9/11, Republicans, you've obviously talked about this a lot, totally pro-war. And Democrats were like, hold on a second. And that's how Obama gets, quote unquote, elected. Right. But then Obama turns around and is just as bad as Bush, if not worse.
Yeah.
And then the Democrats are defending that. And then the Republicans are like, hey, whoa, let's pump the brakes. And then Trump's first term, Republicans take that non-interventionist idea. The Democrats become all like, we need to go to war with Russia. And they're, the stuff with Syria and Afghanistan and all that sort of stuff. And then that switches again. Because then the Democrats became pro-war with Ukraine. The Republican.
Yep.
It's like back and forth. And then looking at the way
Iran.
And then now with Iran.
They flipped again.
October 7th, paragliding go-karts. And you have this like seesaw swinging back and forth, or, going back and forth, pendulum swinging back and forth, where people like unironically, people I know, unironically taking positions that just 5 years ago they were diametrically opposed to on principle, but now they're completely supporting stuff like intelligence agencies. And I can't remember if this was on DPH
or small nukes being deployed against Iran.
Glass the desert versus war is a Christian, that's anti-Christian. Yeah. Switching on things like immigration, switching on things like, Democrats used to be all about free speech. And that's what liberalism, meant, was like, your rights and all that kind of stuff. And now they're the ones that are the most censorship prone, but then the right is as well. So you have this like
when
back
it comes
and forth.
To the Jews. Yep.
Right. And so it's like this discombobulator overall of let's take the same group of people and let's just buffet them back and forth. And then because they're not actually based on principle, we can just basically manipulate and mold them however we want. But in the age of Trump, it seems like that is actually causing a disintegration layer that something like the DSA is indicative of, that MAGA was initially indicative of, and it might be losing steam, which is where I think Badlands comes in. And let's keep going. Let's keep that pressure washer going on the driveway because there's still more to go.
I love where you took that, because that is exactly how I feel. It's funny that you used the analogy you just did, because on the show for a few years, I've been talking about a concept I call the pendulum theory, or the pendulum paradigm. And this is largely coming from my past as a self-described Democrat, who for a long time, I was self-described Democrat all through the Bush era, through the first half of the Obama era. And then I was like, well, I still am, but I don't like what the Democrats are doing. So then I became just disillusioned and apolitical, even though I hated the Republicans. Then when I started gravitating toward Trump, I was caveating myself for the first 2 years of Trump by saying, I'm a pro-Trump Democrat. Part of this is this need that we've all got to absolve ourselves of and shed, of needing to identify as a thing, which is this tribal human nature type of thing. There are reasons people do that. And
qualify it in a way too, like saying you're a pro-Trump Democrat. Like I'm still cool, guys. I'm still cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So and I've largely shed a lot of that, and now I'm open about that. I do not plan to ever identify as a Republican. I do not think that's where we're going. But to your point about the pendulum, and what I've said before is, when I coined that term, the pendulum paradigm or the pendulum theory, it's nothing new. It's nothing people haven't figured out in this audience. Of hey, they swing you to one extreme, they swing the collective mind, meaning the collective mandate, to one extreme, and then they know that they've got to pull it back. Because people could say, hey, if they were in control during, let's just go back in this century to the Bush era, Why would they need to swing you back? Why would they want to swing back if they're doing everything they want? They got the forever war they want. They got the people on board and all that. Because they know, this is where I get into even some God stuff. They know that even retarded people and normies, there is a moral center to human beings, to many human beings. And there is a logical center that we are encoded with. And if you push and you keep pushing and you keep pushing in the same direction of falsity, something is going to snap eventually. The voices that are against what you're doing, if what you're doing is false and bad, immoral, the arguments against it are going to sound stronger and stronger and stronger over time as time stretches, right? So even though I was on the side of anti-intervention in the Middle East at the beginning of the Bush era, the majority of Republicans, like 90-something%, were in favor of it. A slight majority of Americans, I think, were in favor of it, like over that 50% mark, just for the sake of argument. 8 years in, you were more at a 45% were in favor. Or you were at these weird levels where it was like 30% in favor, 20% don't want to talk about it, 50% strongly opposed, you know, those sorts of numbers. The machine has not subsisted this long. The uniparty, the system, has not subsisted this long by failing to recognize and get ahead of mass shifts in public consciousness. They ride those and they preempt them. So that's what I mean by pendulum theory. They take you in the Bush era all the way on an actual level to where they want to go. They want to be involved in the Middle East. There's all these actual reasons that the system wants to be over there, the military-industrial complex, the media-industrial complex. One of the ironies of the Patriot pendulum, I called it the Patriot pendulum in the last 20 years, is the very paradigm that got stretched and enforced the military-industrial complex under Bush also enforced or created, made more powerful rather, the media industrial complex that was in opposition to the military industrial complex. And that may sound contradictory for the machine, but the machine knows that the media industrial complex is going to be the vanguard of the leftward pendulum shift. So the way I would frame this is the Bush era was defined by the military industrial complex. First, it was very pro and they rode that patriotic momentum. And then it started to deteriorate. So while the military industrial complex story was deteriorating, the media industrial complex was growing in public mind share because it was criticizing the military industrial complex. One of the reasons I thought of this even this weekend is Friday night we were talking about the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And I remember how much of an impact Stephen Colbert's White House Correspondents' Dinner speech in 2006 had on me as a liberal. Because here was a guy in 2006 that was part of the new media, the Comedy Central media, the cool media, and he was just excoriating the Bush era and the military-industrial complex right to the president's face in a way that we did not see in American politics before that. Like, it wasn't Trump who first started doing that. They started playing with this with the Obama era. He was the first kind of pop culture president in the internet age anyway.
Yeah.
And the brilliance of that, with the benefit of hindsight now, is that they were already building the controlled opposition to the Bush era because they knew that the American people were going to need a pressure release valve to go into. And they rode that whiplash against the Bush jingoist era into this populist, new media, accountability, hope and change Obama story. And of course, Donald Trump, to your other point, I think has taken a hammer to both at the same time. And one of the ways I'd frame this actually in Deadwood is the machine's been doing the pendulum for a long time. I don't think Trump is doing a pendulum back and forth. I described it as I think Trump took the jar of ants, the red jar. He took the red jar of ants and the black jar of ants. Instead of saying, you guys are in control for 5 years, and then you guys are in control, and we're going to kind of like keep each jar of ants happy enough because they're going to get it back. And we're going to put them all in the same jar, and I'm going to shake it for 10 years. And I basically think that's what he's doing.
Yeah.
And whatever's in the center of that jar, like whatever is grounded on some kind of principle, is going to be the only stuff left in that jar by the time we get to the end of this era.
Or because there's no principles, it'll all just be gone, and I'd be okay with that outcome as well. So, okay, this will get a little metaphysical. This is tying into the stuff that I ended up digging into with the Ether series. I wrote this paper called "The Ether is the fingerprint, or as the fingerprint of God." Starting with the question, why does nature seek the ground? Electrical circuits, if you are the shortest path to ground, that's when you get electrocuted. If you have a bare wire that's touching a piece of metal in an enclosure, it's going to short out that circuit, and it's not going to work properly. And that's nature seeking ground in the context of an electrical circuit. That is essentially catharsis of tension. You have charge build up, it must release, it needs to release. And that fundamental reality of nature applies across every aspect of physical science, whether that's weather patterns, whether that is, if you look at, for instance, a topographical map. I live close to St. Louis, so the Mississippi River, you have the watershed. And you look at what the watershed looks like at an aerial view, and then you look at a picture of lightning, it's the same exact pattern. Because at its core, there is the same exact phenomena, which is, in a nutshell, pressure mediation. Buildup of tension, buildup of pressure, it must release. High ground to low ground. That's water flowing downhill. And it's finding the path of least resistance. It's mediating the pressure as it carves the rocks, and then it goes into the river and down into the ocean. That's it on a physical level. And the reason why it ultimately does that is because the ether itself functions in that way. There's tension buildup, there's tension release. It grounds back to itself in a perpetual loop. And the reason why that is that way is because God himself, as the Trinity, actually exists in that fashion. You have Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. They operate in the same way. You have Father as the source. The Son is the radiation of himself. That's Hebrews 1, verse 1. And the Spirit is the path to ground back. And it's in this perfect harmony of tension is not a bad thing per se. It's just there's
the energy.
It's a buildup of energy, release of energy, expression of energy back to source, and this cycle. So in that way, literally down to how atoms form and molecules form, nature reverberates and literally declares God's glory in the most minute way possible. So that's on the physical side of things. We, by being derived of the ether, because I call the ether the primordial clay with which God created everything, we're part of that. We are essentially energy beings. Our relationships will then follow the same structure and same pattern within a family unit, within a community, within a country, within global entities. I've mentioned this before, that the way we tell stories, where you have a buildup of tension and then you have catharsis. That's not cute. We don't do that because, oh, that's a good idea. We're doing that because that's literally how reality itself was designed. And so we can identify these patterns, and then you can see that happening in the political spectrum, where there's this buildup of tension and it needs to properly ground. And the only way it can properly ground is if we ground ourselves back to God through first principles, through the grounding rod of Jesus Christ, because that's the grounding rod that God provided back for humanity to be reconciled to himself, to get us plugged back into the source that sin, disconnected us from. And so what I think, they're not thinking of it in these terms, but the powers that would be like to play that pendulum swing. And you can think of it as like an electrical box, which you've had some experience with this stuff recently.
Yes.
And you have a wire that's broken because of sin. So God is the ground that we need to get back.
My dad did sin and cut right through that damn wire without looking on the other side of the cross.
Entire saw too.
Yes.
But you have this wire. It's inside of an enclosure, and it needs to be connected back, but it's broken. And so what happens is it's swinging back and forth, and it shorts out on the metal box. And so then we need to get back to that ground. So let's ground over here. Nope, shorts out. Oh, So it's just this constant back and forth of, instead of grounding to God as the ultimate principle, which is good, is going to be natural law. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Live honestly, pay what you owe, and hurt no one without any just cause. The pendulum swing of the political parties throughout history too. It's not just within America, but a microcosm within American history. They don't want us to ground back to those first principles. But the tension builds and it has to be released. And so what they do is they build up tension.
They give it a release.
They give it a release
valve.
The dirty break is an aspect of that release.
Yeah.
Trump coming in, and there's why it's interesting that Trump, and I think you're accurate in not framing him as a pendulum, but more as a surge and a push that's bringing that back to ground, which I think is encapsulated in his expression, giving power back to you, the people, which, if by that he meant, let's keep doing the same thing we've done for the last 250 years, then he's a fraud.
Yep.
It can't be that, because doing what we've done for the last 250 years has gotten us right here. We can't keep doing that. We need to find the path of ground, which I argue is going back to first principles, natural law, understanding what that actually is. And ultimately, it can only be done by grounding ourselves back to God. And the only way, of course, to do that is through the radiation of his glory, Jesus Christ, which means ultimately it's a spiritual issue. But even still, I look at the book of Proverbs in scripture as, within the context of God's sovereignty, it is a book of probabilities. If you live wisely, in general, you will have positive results. If you live foolishly, in general, you will have negative results. Essentially, if you properly ground yourself to proper principles that God has
physics
encoded,
engine of reality.
Yeah, if you're properly grounded to reality through wisdom, it'll go well for you in general. If you short circuit yourself, you're going to be screwed. In that context, as a nation, if we want to actually stop the pendulum swing nonsense, stop the majority rule, more relativistic nonsense, we have to get grounded back to the good principles this country was actually founded on, that immediately departed from. And to think that we can act in a way that it goes against nature and get a peaceful result, we're just deluding ourselves, and we're right back in that pendulum swing, and we're at the mercy of whoever's cooking up this DSA dirty break thing.
Very well said, and I love the image of Trump supercharging these pathways, because again, the concept of acceleration and accelerationism. I mean,
More
think
power.
think of in physics. Think of this on a like physical through a physical lens. What's force? It's mass times acceleration. One of the things in my fighting days that I used to talk about is over time you just kind of get a feel for who you think is going to hit really hard. Mm-hmm. And as you get more and more experienced, you'll pick guys out that you never would have picked out 5 years before that, in terms of just looking at the guys warming up or something. Who do you think hits hard? Obviously, you don't know how hard they're hitting until you get hit by them, or until they miss you and you're like, oh my God.
Like you hear it go by and you're like, whoo.
But a lot of times, like, it's funny because people understand, mass times acceleration, like that's force, that's what it's but it's a little bit more nuanced than that, and at the same time more literal than that. The 210-pound guy who's, fairly fast for his size, has a lot of mass behind him, hits really hard, right? But the 150-pound guy who is 20% faster, and the key, 20% more accurate,
mm-hmm.
is putting whatever you'd call it. I can't do live math, but whatever percent of mass he is less than the 210-pound guy. He doesn't make up that whole difference in speed. So I think people sometimes get confused. They're like, are you saying the 150-pound guy hits harder than the 210-pound guy? Not usually. Not if they're both professional fighters. Usually the 200-pound guy is going to hit meaningfully harder. But in practicality, in fight outcome, the 150-pound guy that hits really hard is going to be far more devastating of a striker. And it's because he's usually a lot more accurate. Yeah. And that 20% difference in speed and that 20% difference in accuracy means that even though he's a little bit less powerful, in terms of how his power is manifesting in the physical realm, he is delivering more damage to the enemy on a consistent basis, because he's hitting the enemy more often and in more vulnerable areas. And that's where like acceleration comes in, where I've always said in fighting, of course, distance and timing is the most important thing in fighting. And it's basically a first principle. It's pretty much inarguable. My trainer blew our minds with this when we were like 15. Because he'd say, what's the most important attribute? And you learn as a striker, speed kills, speed kills, speed kills. So you kind of learn to mime that. It's not strength, it's speed. And he's talking about acceleration. But he would always say, no, distance and timing. If you have perfect distance and timing, you can't lose a fight. Because it means, quite simply, that you can hit when you want to hit, and you cannot be hit when you do not want to be hit. So then it renders the speed and mass of your opponent completely irrelevant because you've mastered distance and timing. But on a physical basis, the accelerationism, it's kind of what you said with Trump. If you think about this on the left, and we can transition toward the right, what Trump does by kind of embodying these first principles arguments, and Chris talks about this in different ways in terms of how Trump adopts certain positions that he may not even fully believe in, or he may adopt for a little while, or he may translate in different ways. But when Trump says something, when he deploys energy into an argument, he does it at full speed and full power. And most importantly, the reason I brought up my fighting analogy, to a specific narrative target.
Yeah.
He doesn't just say stuff, right? Like, one of the funny things is, even though we talk about first principles and our audience likes these macro, big picture, conceptual discussions to kind of help orient us and what's our purpose and what are we trying to build together, that's not as effective with what Trump is doing. That, I think, is effective for a building era and a building phase and what comes next. What are our principles? What are we trying to build? What are the macro concepts we all kind of orbit around? That sort of thing. That's not what Trump is doing in the last 10 years. What he's doing is he is concentrating fire on the problems. And I think what he does is, to your point, he supercharges those analogies. He supercharges the argument, and he injects the argument directly into whoever is most vulnerable to that argument. So in the initial Trump era, the reason I started with the left tonight, because it's the dirty break concept that they're talking about, but I would have started there anyway, because I think that is the weakest argument in the American zeitgeist. The modern leftoid argument, it doesn't even have a thin veneer in the modern era of principled argument. There's almost no principles around which the brand of liberalism is orbiting anymore. To your point, it used to be free speech, freedom of expression. It's not only not defending those ideals in the last 10 years, it is attacking them directly. No medical freedom, no freedom of autonomy.
Too.
Yeah, the only freedom it has, the only bodily autonomy freedom that you have is to kill your unborn children. Otherwise, you don't have the freedom to not inject yourself with an experimental... It's insane, right? And I would argue, and to your point about Trump with the energy push, Trump ignored the Republicans kind of because he was like, we're going to take this out. We are going to just blast into the zeitgeist. We need strong borders. We need freedom of speech. We need strong borders. We need freedom of speech. Just 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And you've just got the leftoid mind. Like, first they go all out defense, like, or offense against offense, and they try to fight against those principles. And over time, it's just an untenable position for them. So that resistance is going to break. And once that resistance breaks, I think that's what you're seeing right now in the left kind of pendulum, the left side of the zeitgeist, is that they don't know what to orient around. And to pass it to you, the way I would, and you can comment on the left and then we can transition to the right. What I would say Trump has done with his rhetoric and with his argument is, I feel that he forced the left to define themselves in opposition to him, which was a trap. And he forced the right to define themselves in alignment to him, which was a trap. And I think we're almost at the end game of the first trap. And I think we're just getting into the beginnings of the consequences of the second trap.
So you said that the principles are kind of like the building phase. And I would say that we, the people, and I don't mean as a collective, I mean we individually, that's a point that that I made on my show, that the notion that the people is what we as individuals do. It's not actually a thing. It's something that we do. It's a thing that is kind of like in physics. There's no such thing as a wave. A wave is something that a thing does. So we, the people, individually, can start building now, because ultimately, to Chris Paul's point, it's going to require that our inner life is properly in order, so that when Trump is done defeating these enemies that are seeking to destroy us, which I think he is doing, he's not going to then have the next project of, all right, everybody, let's start building. You kind of want to have the stuff prepared and ready to go. Biblical analogy to that: King David wanted to build the temple for God, and he was he's expanded the borders of Israel to basically from the borders of Egypt all the way to like the Euphrates. Like he expand like massive area of land. And God told him, no, you're a man of war, so you're not going to be building my house. That's going to be your son. So Solomon is one who ended up building the temple. But David actually got everything ready to go for Solomon, so that when Solomon took over as king, once David died, everything was ready to go. And the book of Chronicles, it's probably in First Chronicles, might even be in Samuel, I can't remember. It's like excruciatingly detailed about this guy built this, and like literally the names and the number of people and how many bronze bowls they made and how many golden forks they made. All this stuff that David had ready to go, had cedar imported from Lebanon and all that kind of stuff, so that once the temple could be built, it was ready to go. So it's like, while you're at war, you prepare for peace. And that's our job as we the people. And so that's why I stress so hard on in any chance I can get, if we're going to build a golden age, which is going to require us doing the building. Trump is only there to invoke the Anglo-Saxon king mandate to protect the realm. And I think he's doing a good job. And time will tell whether or not he finishes that job. But at the very least, we the people can use him as our shield while we go ahead and start the building process. And it starts on the individual level by understanding what our founding values actually are, understanding what liberty actually is, understanding what rights actually are. That's something I talked about on my show tonight. We're a country of rights, and that I don't think most people can actually define what a right actually is. Case in point, they call voting a right. But if we don't get those things in order, then all the work that Trump is doing, as beautiful as it is to watch, is going to end up for naught, because we're just going to go right back to war by adopting positions that lead to war, because that's essentially what natural law is, a tension between war and peace. Trump is a master narrative weaver. Kind of to your point, there was a headline I saw on CNN about the whole Trump saying, remember that? And then they're mocking him that it didn't actually happen. But then you know what the article ended up doing? Talking about because Trump was talking about how wind power sucks and how you couldn't watch the Biden Trump debate. So in this article, they're bringing up something they probably don't want to ever talk about ever again. Right. But he's got them talking about it. That is manipulation on a level that is just without fathom.
And again, I think, and I'll start to transition toward the right. That the right again as a brand and as a story. I think what you just pointed out of that headline is exhibit number 8 billion we've seen in the last 10 years of the left needing to define themselves in direct opposition to anything and everything Trump has said. I can see the brains breaking in real time, and we've probably all seen this in this audience. I usually use my Canadian laws as the guinea pigs or the analogs for this show. But like when I'll be talking to them about how things are going up there, and they're just basically laying out principled argument after principled argument about all the things going wrong in their country, most of it revolving around economic issues and immigration issues and crime issues, all of which are obviously tied in together. Mm-hmm. And then when I say, well, what about, building a wall, and what about enforcing immigration laws, and what about this? And they can see where I'm leading them, so they recoil and reject, even though they're just trapped in that binary. But you can see the tension that they've got right now with it. I wanted to show as a transition into the right side of the equation. First of all, people who have been watching the narrative for years are no strangers to this chart. It's what you made me think of. There's often the 3-act structure. I've done whole shows on this concept of the Fichtean curve. This is what I think is the best writing style or narrative style. Very broadly follows something close to the 3-act structure that we're all familiar with. Rising action, climax, falling action. But I think this is more what the best stories follow. And this is what I've been arguing for 5 years or so, is I think what Trump, the age of Trump, is, what the InfoWar is. I've mentioned that basically you can picture each of these little curves and troughs as micro narratives within themselves, chapters of the narrative war. You know, you could look at this one. Can you see my cursor on this?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. So if let's take this right here. This might be the 2020 election cycle and the whole Biden era. Could be right in here. Like 2020, you get the Biden era, everybody's feeling down the dumps. You get this inflection point to 2024. Then you get like, oh man, the golden age isn't really, like, it's kind of a little bit weird. Hold on, you get something up there, right? And it's not positive, negative. It's mass psychological energy following the story and then pressure releases.
Yep.
But pay attention to the part of the chart that a lot of people don't pay attention to in storytelling. The macro narrative is escalating the entire time.
Yeah.
You're just getting pressure releases off and on, all the way through. You get people checking out of politics, they check back in. They check out, they check back in. So, you can choose and pick what are these crises. You can define these however you want. Are they political scandals? Are they worldwide geopolitical situations? Are they inflection points? Whatever. But I think that this is kind of a way to picture the energy that Trump is charging into the zeitgeist. And at the end here, when we get a climax, the falling action, the reason you want falling action in this story is the word you used, and one of my favorites is catharsis. You want the reader, you want the viewer to feel catharsis, and another word for catharsis is resolution.
Yeah.
You want a resolution of what happened. And
Grounding.
one more point on this from a storytelling perspective, I would make that, I've talked about this with Chris, who has some hipster sensibilities, even though we've rehabilitated him to some degree on Story Hour. Just in terms of, he likes contrarian stories. You probably are a little bit like that. Although you like some very classical stories, so maybe you're not. I would argue, to your point earlier about narrative structure, when you are subverting narrative structure, you are inherently going against God's logical design, and you are inherently doing something displeasurable to the reader and to the viewer. The reason subversive fiction will never be mass market popular, is because it is bad. It is inherently deconstructive, destructive. It is not building anything satisfying to the reader. It is simply rug pulling every bit of psychological or narrative tension that you build, and then you rug pull it and you rug pull it and you rug pull it, except you just crash down. There's no resolution, there's no catharsis, there's no anything. It's subversion for the sake of subversion. And the last point I make on this is the reason things like Tolkien and things like Star Wars and things like Marvel, when it was not fake and gay, the reason that those take off in the collective zeitgeist of the Western mind is not because they're flashy and fun and exciting. It's because they tell stories that inherently follow this structure.
Yep.
It isn't that they figured out the story structure, to your earlier point. It's that this is the story structure encoded into human beings that works. They want to see something start out. They want to see it rise. They want to see it challenged. They even want to see it fall. And then they want to see it rise again and have resolution and then falling action. That is just what people want. So when you make a Star Wars movie and you undercut that ramp and that trough and that release, people are not going to go back. And it's not because you didn't tell a story that was interesting. It's because you didn't tell a story that felt good to experience, which is not the same thing as having a happy movie or a happy story. These two things aren't mutually exclusive.
Because a happy story and a happy movie will still have that core structure, because tension is not inherently a bad thing. Pressure is not inherently a bad thing.
You need
It
it
does.
for a good story.
Yeah. That graph there, one of the things that pops in my mind is it's a roller coaster. That click, 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 click. Like
Yep.
each
That's
one
how
of
I
those
described
clicks
it
is,
when I first brought it up.
yeah, each one of those clicks is one of those those rise and fall. And the question that led me to write that little ether paper on the Trinity was just ask, like, okay, why is that what we gravitate towards?
Yeah.
And it goes back to the understanding, at least what Scripture has revealed about the Trinity, and then seeing how the ether actually functions, which you can see that literally under the ferrocell, the little magnetic field viewer I've got, and you can see this triadic nature in the substrate of reality, and then understand there's a triadic nature to God, and realize that the reason why things are that way is the Greeks had a way of reasoning that I don't know what the official term is for. I call it the principle and attribute logic chain. And if you study an attribute and you realize, oh, it's an attribute of a higher principle. So then you start studying that higher principle and you realize, oh, it's an attribute of a higher principle, And eventually you get to the point, they called it essentially the terminal principle. They referred to that as the ether. They made a mistake in their logical chain. They stopped one step short, because God is the ultimate terminal principle. But that's why stories work. That's why governments will not function towards peace if they are rooted in behaviors that lead to war. And the reason why we have consent, by the way, and the reason why violating consent leads to war, is that within the Godhead, the Trinity, there's actually consent. Scripture talks about when Jesus goes to the cross, he didn't go against his will. He literally, deliberately submitted his will to the Father and deliberately went to the cross. That's his consent. We have consent because God has consent within himself. And so then that's how you can then structure this is like as first principles as you can get on what's the nature of government. Why should we even form governments? If we do, what should it be like? It should be that consent is honored, because within the Godhead, consent is honored within the triune nature of God. And so if we're going to build a system, if we're going to build a golden age, we have to follow that pattern. Otherwise, we're going to be the new age story structure that's just going to crash and burn. We're going to be the American experiment that has crashed and burned after 250 years, because fundamentally we violated one of the most core principles of reality, and that is this proper tension buildup and release, exemplified in honoring consent. And I'll keep saying it, as long as it takes until enough people get on board with it. But otherwise, to again invoke Chris Paul, we're just going to keep getting the hose again, because that's at those little crisis points, whatever. Those little episodes are people getting the hose, and then eventually,
exactly.
Yeah, which eventually, ultimately, I think the ultimate catharsis is not going to come through our own efforts, because that's kind of a point that the Apostle Paul makes, that the law came basically to prove that we can know what is right and good. That's the argument he makes in Romans. Everyone knows there's a God. Everyone knows that we're accountable to God, but we're broken by our sin. But doesn't mean we're all like diabolically evil. It means we're broken. We just cannot consistently choose the good. We choose the good a lot of times, but we just can't do it consistently, and it has to be done every single time. Otherwise, we're screwed. And so that's why Christ came, because he did do it consistently every single time, and set up the foundation of a kingdom wherein he will reign in truth and justice, the full culmination of Plato's philosopher king. It's like the marriage of Greek philosophy and Hebrew sensibilities of the law. That's what we're ultimately working towards. We can't build that ourselves, but still, in the meantime, we should live honestly, pay what we owe, and don't hurt anyone without any just cause, i.e. natural law, honor people's consent. Otherwise, we're screwed.
and all the way back to the political realm, which is not the end state of this stuff. It's the end state of the inversion of all of that stuff. politicking and everything, but I think its inversion is underway right now, which we're both kind of talking about. I mean, last point on the lefty side of the ledger would be, I remembered this headline. Harris reaches out to Mandani, pro-Palestinian activists in the run-up to 2028. So this was a big scoop out of Axios back on July 1st. Interesting that came on the same day. I remember I wrote about this on my Substack. This article came out on the same day as the Dirty Break article. So, some marching orders went out in the establishment left of saying, hey, we got a problem here. And hey, Kamala's over there? She's over at their house. She's over at the other tribe right now. And, I just sit back and go, hey, that is the story of leftism has been supercharged with so much orange energy over the last 10 years that it is breaking apart. And as that energy leaks out, it is just looking for escape routes. Maybe if we become more extreme, maybe if we become less extreme. And then it's like, all right, well, if you become less extreme, you're just going to become Republicans and we're going to destroy them next too, which I want to talk about next. But let me thank our next show sponsor, which happens to be our friends over at ourselves, actually. Hold on. We'll do ourselves first. Yeah, well, we are our friends.
I'm my own best friend.
Our friends over at ourselves, starting with Badlands Shop. One of the easiest ways to support Badlands Media is just by shopping. Before you buy anything online, take a quick look at the Badlands Shop first. We get a growing list of companies with everything from outdoor gear and health products to security, apparel, and a lot more. Carry smart and live free with silent Faraday bags and a simple way to keep your privacy secure on your phones, fobs, and devices. Make your backyard a little more awesome this summer with customizable, heavy-duty fire pits from My Fireside. I have one of those. They are amazing. It's been out in the rain, actually, for quite a while, which is I shouldn't do, but it still looks brand new. So just shows you how much cold-rolled steel is in that thing. Need a little extra focus without reaching for another cup of coffee? Flow Blends Premium Nootropic pouches got you covered. And yes, it's officially boomerang season. Grab yourself a custom Badlands boomerang from Wooden Boomerangs and have a little fun with it. Help support businesses that support Badlands Media. Head on over to badlandsmedia.tv/shop. You might find exactly what you're looking for. And we are also brought to you by our very own business and its mascot.
One hero! One mission! To deliver softness to America!
No, Chi-Chi, we can't stop for snacks, dude. We have to deliver all of these soft disclosure gift cards.
He goes by Zach Payne.
The motion detector!
Hey, stop fighting over the beer brush.
Life finds a way.
Hydrate your elbows! Moisturize your soul! Feel the rhythm together! Makes you feel alive and let the lotion roll! Soft disclosure, hear the cry! Maximum softness! Do or die!
Muffin, hit it.
We have the best ad campaign
It never
on
gets
Rumble
old.
and potentially on the media, especially the deep cuts within that only long-term Badlanders know about. And last sponsor tonight is our friends at Rumble, specifically, speaking of first principles, our friends at Rumble Wallet. We hear a lot about crypto, but here's the part most people miss. Crypto was created so you can actually own and control your money. After the 2008 financial crisis, Bitcoin was designed as an alternative to banks. So instead of a bank holding your money, delaying transfers, or limiting access, you're in control. And if you've ever had to wait for a transfer to clear, you felt the problem. Now fast forward to today, everyone's heard of crypto, but getting started still feels complicated. That's exactly why we use Rumble Wallet. It takes all the complexity and makes it simple. Choose what you want: Bitcoin, dollar-backed stablecoins, or even digital gold backed by real gold. No complicated setup. It connects with MoonPay, so you can use your credit card, debit card, or bank and be up and running in minutes. And once you're set up, you can even support your favorite Rumble creators like us at Badlands directly. So do this now. Scan the QR code or click the link in the description and download Rumble Wallet. From there, you can set up your wallet, tap buy, and you're in the game. In just a few minutes, you can go from hearing about crypto to eventually owning some. And we often talk in the back channels about Bitcoin and obviously on the shows, but it is interesting just in light of first principles and Trumpian arguments and some of the stuff we're talking about. There are certain maxis, certainly not all of them, but who talk about like, hey, just let the altcoin madness play out. Just let Congress argue about whether or not they can regulate a thing that can't be regulated. Like, Bitcoin's going to find whatever the low water mark is, whatever sea level is in its price. Maybe that's down for a while, and then it just rips people's faces off. And that's kind of been its pattern as soon as it exhausts all of the counter narratives. We don't know if that will perpetuate, but it has so far.
I've mentioned to you, Ben Cowan is the guy I like listening to as far as Benjamin Cowan into the cryptoverse. He's not a Bitcoin maximalist. He's big fan of Bitcoin, but he's not a maximalist, which makes his analysis of price action a little more trustworthy, in my opinion. And he's absolutely nailed this entire year. He basically called the bear market, and his prediction is that it's going to start turning around in sometime in quarter four. And that's just what it does in midterm years. And he's made the point, which I think is interesting, because he's not like a big narrative guy, but he's like, it's not tied to any narrative. Like, people have tried that. Oh, this is happening, therefore this price. He's like, it just seems to have a pattern.
Money, right?
What's that?
Like, it's more about the flow of just money and where money's going, or
or something even inherent to the system itself. I don't know, but so
that's where people talk about power laws, which I'm only just starting to dip my toes into what power laws are. And
I've seen that phrase. I haven't really gone down that rabbit hole yet, but
it's a strange one. I definitely am not versed enough on it.
Do you happen to have like an extra couple hours per day that I could use, because I don't have enough time in the day?
For sure, I'm the guy with all the time in the world, for sure. No, we will all. Speaking of acceleration, we've accelerated our minds into a state of whatever the hell it is, superposition. And that's not always a good thing. But I wanted to show, as a transition into talking about the right, nice concise episode as always when us two get together. Where is it? Which one? Here we go. A series of short clips on Bill Maher very recently, kind of alluding to the DSA. Well, he was directly referencing the DSA, but kind of this dirty break idea. This is how most of the establishment side of the leftist ledger is responding to this dirty break. And I think you will see by the second and third short clip here why this is not going to spare the right side of the ledger either. So you got to look for these patterns sometimes, and then once you see them, they're hard to unsee.
So I'm not living in communist America. I mean, I know that the talking point is that, well, it's not communism, it's socialism. Okay, I've read the quotes from the DSA platform, from their own mouths. Don't tell me I'm not seeing what I am seeing. And DSA, again, they
So we got that. And he wasn't done there.
Like, if this is where the Democratic Party is going, where this democratic socialist, this obsession with Israel, with the Jew hating, they don't believe in capitalism, no prisons. If this is where they're going, my vote is in play.
Okay.
And
I like to hear that.
It actually always has been. every year, I don't make my decision by who has an R or a D. I actually always came to the conclusion that the Democrat was probably better.
Sure.
And voted for them.
Okay.
And Trump can't run again, and he'd be a little too exciting for me anyway. So it's either going to be you or Rubio.
And then
abolish the police. No prisons, no police. Like, what world do they think we could possibly live in under these conditions? It's just a level of nutty that I'm so glad that whenever it was, I was like, no, I'm not going along, because this is where it ends.
Could you see yourself voting for J.D. Vance?
Yes.
So there's a couple things there. Number one, I use Bill Maher because he is just like the Atlantic, I think is sort of an intelligentsia signal. Bill Maher is a cultural signal. He's a cultural force within the establishment left. He's the cool kids that cool liberal boomers like Bill Maher. My parents like Bill Maher. They're not CNN people, you see, John. They're Bill Maher people. They get the real stuff. The guy who swears.
Right.
So that it is notable whenever Bill Maher very publicly adopts a stance. He's obviously adopting an anti-DSA, anti-dirty break stance. He is trying to close ranks around the establishment Democrats. But isn't it interesting that Bill Maher has opened a little pressure release valve for himself and those he represents? And that pressure release valve, we're talking about path of least resistance, the energy. You're trying to preserve your energy, right? The energy of the system you represent, whether you're a bolt of lightning or you're a river that's trying to get your way to the ocean. You're trying to hold all that energy, like you said earlier, and you're trying to deploy it strategically. You're not seeking the path of least resistance just for doing that, right? You're seeking the path of least resistance so that you can take as much energy as you have and get it to its ground, as you said earlier, whether that's the ocean, whether that's the ground, whether that's a lightning rod, whatever it is.
Right.
So do we think Bill Maher is MAGA? Like there's three people who do. They're like his secret white hats in control of Bill Maher. Okay. for to not be retarded, no, he's not MAGA, right? Bill Maher probably doesn't want the same end state that we want. So he's trying to preserve something. And I thought it was interesting that one of the pathways that Bill Maher sees to preserving whatever thing Bill Maher is trying to preserve is through J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio. And he makes sure to try to close that rhetorical door on Trump 2028, which they're getting a little nervous about.
Yeah, he didn't look super
but
confident
anyway,
in that.
I thought Bill Maher oddly functions as a transition into what the effect of Trumpism and this same era that we already touched on, a bit in the left section, because we're not going to go another hour and a half on the right. But just, I think that we're at the beginnings of a dirty break on the right between MAGA and Republicanism. And it seems to me that the energy that Trump in the past reserved for attacking leftist talking points, attacking the Democrat establishment, he's starting to be a little bit more direct, I think, about directing some of that attention on the sort of conservative and Republican movement, specifically maybe exemplified by Congress in 2026.
Well, there's a sense in which that break has sort of already happened, or it at least has been brewing for a long time. Because establishment Republicans, I mean, I'm thinking of the guy who's the Speaker of the House, Ryan, who ended up going to Fox News or whatever. Like was that
Paul Ryan?
Paul, yeah. Where, Trump has sort of brought down a number of establishment guys, or at least, brought them to heel, at least for a time. So there's a sense in which, Trump, which, he's obviously the figurehead of MAGA, at least its biggest champion, started that process a long time ago. And it's obviously been tried to be hijacked along the way by, the establishment. Chris is obviously really good at tracking that sort of thing. I'm definitely not good at tracking that, because I'm not a masochist like Chris is.
Yeah.
Texting myself to, the daily Weimar and all that crap. But
yeah.
I am able to see enough of what he's talking about that they have tried to hijack that movement, because they recognize that it is, as a concept, is an existential threat, because ultimately it is going back to the first principles. MAGA is inherently that pressure washer on the driveway that has to finish it. Otherwise it's not going to, it's not going to be satisfying. So it's kind of like, the inverse of the DSA side of things. It's like the Republicans have already recognized that there is that catastrophic event looming, and they're trying to to head it off and grab hold of the reins and get it away from the the cliff, so to speak. But the test will be if they can actually pull that off. And I don't have a huge amount of faith in people that identify as Republicans that they have because they're not really principled either. Because looking through the list of the way that the parties have flipped back and forth over the last number of decades, I mean, I have family members that are holding positions right now that 10 years ago they were completely the opposite of, which kind of goes to show that MAGA is a lot smaller, probably, than we would like to think that it is.
Right.
But that's not a bad thing, because I know you've made the comments before. It's a loud minority that ends up winning the day, and I think that's true, and I think that's what makes Badlands so important, is because even though we are stifled, we're still a loud and extremely intimidating force, as far, because you cannot argue against first principles. You always end up getting pragmatic arguments, going back to the DSA or even any Republican platform. Why? It's kind of like Chris's thing of how do you know that to be true? Why do you believe that? Well, because, why is that important? Why? And you just keep, chipping, you talk about being the kid that always asked why. We need to bring that back again and just start. And I did this actually today at church. A couple of my friends were before our adult Sunday school got started. I could hear them talking about the Iran war. And then one of them's like, "Don't talk too loud. Don't get Jonathan involved in this conversation." And I was like, "Oh, like ha ha ha."
Which shows
funny.
They're afraid to be challenged on whatever they're saying.
Well, right. And as they're talking about it, like, "Oh yeah, it's just so terrible. Like the bombing started up again." I was like, "Yeah, okay. Well, how do you know that's true?" I just took a page out of Chris Paul's book. How do you know that's true? And he had to admit I'm trusting sources that I know that guy in particular had even said before that, yeah, the media lies, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, but now you're trusting them. And
right.
That to me, I think is going to be the ultimate break, is where people just recognize like there's just nothing there to hold on to. And hopefully people recognize that, going back to the idea of grounding, we really need to get that catharsis. The only way you're going to get it is by going back to those first principles. It's fun seeing guys like Bill Maher playing the worm.
Mm-hmm.
There's still a part of us that in that celebrity worship is like, "Oh, we got Bill Maher on our side." No, he's not on our side. He's on his own side. And he's playing that controlled opposition, whether he knows it or not. It's embarrassing for someone like that. You can see how he's positioned himself over that too. There's been over the last number of years how he's called out the lunatic left and all that. So it's not like this is a new
rebranded
thing. Yeah, it's not new for him. I think he likes to think of himself as a contrarian, this independent thinker. Which to that point, I was actually this past week, I was on the road and I ended up golfing while I was on the road and got paired with this older couple, and politics kind of came up, and you could tell it was like kind of awkward for them to talk about it. But they were like, we were Republicans, we were conservative, but now we identify as independent. Which is kind of the Bill Maher approach. So you're seeing that
growing trend.
You're seeing, because I think I saw a statistic, being what they are, like the most number of people identify as independents now than they ever have. It's like 45%.
Far more. Like far more than ever, which I do think is a good thing, as long as they're not identifying as the independent party,
right?
Which is what you're seeing, a push of that as well.
Yeah.
Let's make a third political party.
Right, which that trend is indicating what you're describing. Because in my mind, a dirty break is inherently going to be a destructive break on either side of the aisle, because I don't think that either party has really the strength to survive something like that. Time will tell with that, but it's interesting to see how people, even from the Republican right, are dissatisfied with where the party is going. And I mentioned Trump, and you get the kind of the grimace, but then when you start talking about, and I did this intentionally, once I saw like the kind of, "Ooh, yeah, Trump, ooh, gross," and just naming some of the things that he has done that is positive, and they're like, "Oh yeah, totally." So
Yeah.
there's something else that they're reacting to there that is interesting to see.
Social consensus. And you mentioned Badlands, and one of the things I liked at the beginning and have only grown to like, even though it's not always easy, is that I think we have come to represent an anti-consensus platform, which is not the same thing as a contrarian platform necessarily, although some people would definitely frame us that way. And that applies to ourselves within Badlands. There's been many people who have sifted in and out over the years, and usually very publicly, so it's not like throwing shade or anything, even if that's how people want to take it. They have very publicly made their cases for why they are inherently opposed to what the rest of us are not inherently opposed to, which is we are not pro-consensus. We are not trying, at least our goal is not to seek consensus. It's to argue on principle with each other. It's to try to find the truth. None of us claims to have it. And it's to not censor any viewpoint or, shout down any viewpoint, from being surfaced that would challenge whatever principles we're advancing, which it turns out that a lot of people, Ghost has found this out over the last couple of years, because he obviously talks about the Israel rabbit hole the most. In that specific little microcosm, is what a lot of MAGA people and a lot of truthers, which are obviously a subset adjacent to MAGA, a minority of people who talk about conspiracy theories and recognize that there is an info war, or they followed the Q drops or whatever it is. And turns out that many truthers, many self-described truthers, are simply a consensus formation mob that is there to create a new consensus, and they enforce that consensus protocol, that social and rhetorical consensus protocol, more harshly than Normieville does. Normieville does not really enforce a consensus protocol. Media does, workspaces often do, corporate America does, the government does. So I'm not saying Normieville is good. But I have rarely seen, outside of maybe something like far-left Marxist groups, the sort of bullying, dominating consensus formation tactics that I've seen in the last couple years, specifically post-2024, within the Q community and within the truth community. It's crazy to watch, but the good thing about it is that when you're a platform like this, and when you just keep going forward on these principles, the people who sift out, that includes audience members who no longer like seeing certain tones or subjects of discussion, and that includes hosts, that includes everything. So, the good thing is it doesn't require certain people to keep going. It's just a stance that needs to be forwarded, and the people who believe it needs to be forwarded will continue to forward that stance. And, it's kind of the stance of the anti-stance. And I don't think that that's the hipster. It's not nihilism. There's a fine line between the definitions of like nihilism. Nothing matters. Nothing means everything. Everything is fake. That's how some people frame what people like you and what people like Chris Paul talk about. Everything's fake. You don't trust anything. And that's not a nihilist viewpoint. It's a sovereign viewpoint of saying, if you strip away all that is superfluous and all that is false and all that cannot be verified and therefore should be put into the first two buckets, you will arrive much closer to truth than if you attempt to cling to unverifiable, unknowable things and purport them as or hold them as true. That's how you get into a lot of trouble. And there should have been a humbling process for people over the last few years. I've certainly gone through it and been public about that, of predictions coming wrong and being wrong about directions and being wrong about timelines and maybe figures and maybe factions. That's good. You stay in it. You say, I was wrong about that. You take that new approach into, going forward. And to bring it back to the discussion, you can respond to that. But I think it's interesting to watch a creature like Bill Maher, if you understand his incentive structures and you understand, and I'm not Red Shoe Club, all that kind of stuff. I'm not belittling any of that. I'm just saying what we know of Bill Maher is he is a very smart guy and he's a very astute. I don't mean smart in terms of politics. He is socially very intelligent. He understands cultural trends. He understands movements. He understands mass psychology. When you see him rebranding in real time, that is an indicator. And that's an indicator, I think, of a couple things. Number one, that the dirty break has already happened on the left, that the brand is destroyed, and that they are figuring it out on a delay, and they're scrambling. And number two, I do not think, contrary to what some might believe, that this bodes well for the GOP or the Republican Party. I believe they need the Democrat as democratic institution, the democratic narrative, as the other piece of the controlled opposition binary with which to define themselves in opposition to.
Yeah.
And if they do not have a strong binary of retarded leftists to define themselves against, all they can define themselves against is MAGA. And that's, I think, why you're beginning to see them do that, up to and including courting, because that's what J.D. Vance was doing in that interview.
Oh, yeah.
Openly courting leftists to join the establishment Republican side of the aisle.
Which, to that point, and we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, if Bill Maher looks around, and let's take him at his word that he's always been this conscientious, weigh the issues, and the Democrats just happen to be the best, which I think is probably not true, but let's just pretend it is. And he does that, and he decides that the Republicans are actually the answer now. What that said, that's less commentary on him as it is on Republicans. That
Yes,
the shift
exactly.
has gone so far extreme that it's almost like a pacer car or something like that in racing, where like you kind of just like you pace yourself with it. So the Democrats have been sort of the social engine pushing things just even more and more nuts. But the Republicans really, especially because they're not principled, they can't stay where they originally were, because then they're not even in the same field of view. You got to stay kind of close so that you can have a meaningful comparison. And so if Republicans look around, they go, hey, Bill Maher's with us. Hey, Bill Maher's with us. And they go, you realize what that means about your party?
Yeah, exactly.
Which goes back to my
That's
friend.
exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
Is that if to go back to your energy analogies tonight, like with lightning or with the ether, with water, if you picture Bill Maher as like representative of this leftist energy, this establishment leftist or culturally left energy, it's looking for the path of least resistance to get to a place where it can come to rest.
Right.
And it sees the Republican Party as one of its options.
Yeah.
Right, guys? Bill Maher doesn't see MAGA as one of its options because it knows what it represents. It knows that the principles Bill Maher advances can't survive in the MAGA environment. It will be torn to shreds.
Right.
Just by trying to exist in that paradigm. But it knows it can exist in the Republican paradigm, because Republicans, to your point, to Chris Paul's point, are just statists.
Yep.
And Bill Maher is a statist. And these people are collectivists, ultimately, as are the Republicans. They're just collectivists.
Yeah.
Most of the truth community are collectivists. Trust the plan, don't say anything we don't like, make predictions that don't come true every single day, don't call out the predictions that don't come true, don't ever admit that you were wrong about anything, take credit for the things you were right about even though you make them up. Like consensus formation, cult mentality.
Yep.
And Bill Maher knows that in a first principles environment, just like some Q people know, that they can't survive in a Badlands environment because their viewpoints are going to be challenged.
Right.
And they can't survive that challenging. So that's what I find interesting about people like Maher, is to say he is looking at and publicly beta testing. We talk about Trump beta testing. Bill Maher is beta testing to his lefty establishment audience. Is it safe for me to associate with establishment Republicans, even if they're a little bit MAGA tainted? And his audience is starting to give him that feedback of like, well, maybe, because maybe we can all go over there and be safe. And I love the way you frame that too, because it's tempting to take the win. I think this is a win. But I think it's a win if you're thinking of the end game of destroying the Republican Party too.
Yes.
It's not a win in terms of like, look, the Democrats are coming to their senses.
Right.
Bill Maher's stances have not changed.
Right.
But the Republican Party is very eager to not just scoop up establishment lefties and liberals, but to move towards them to scoop them up.
Yeah. And this goes back again, because they don't have any actual principles. And that is the predictable outcome, and Spooner called this, of a majority rule system, wherein power is decided by majority rule. If you think about that in context of like what is law actually, not thinking natural law per se, although that's part of it. Law is the means by which your life, liberty, and property can be taken away from you. If that is up to majority rule, which I encourage everyone to pick up, you can get a free PDF online of Spooner's trial by jury essay. Chapter, I think it's 12, is his treatment of majority rule, the limitations placed on majority rule by the trial by jury. And that's an argument that people have against it. Like, well, most of us decide. It's like, if you are using a 51% majority to decide the basis by which your life, liberty, and property can be taken away from you, you're insane. He literally says that. He's like, how
just
anyone
hope it won't happen. To just hope more people won't be crazy than not crazy.
Right. Well, but that's the nature of power structures. He says, how anyone ever came to imagine that condition to be one of freedom, that is majority rule, has never been explained. And as for the system being adopted to the maintenance of justice among men, it is a mystery that any human mind could ever have been visited with an insanity wild enough to originate the idea. But that's our system. That's why we can observe these shifting dynamics wherein people that use terms like principled can end up a million miles away from where they originally started off, because they're not actually grounded to any principles. And this is a predictable outcome. I mean, the founders were against the concept of political parties. They recognized them as sort of an unfortunate reality. I've got a quote here from George Washington. He says, I think this was in his farewell address, maybe. However, political parties may now and then answer popular ends, they are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government. That's exactly what we observe today. And then, 50 years later, Spooner writes, this is in that same majority rule chapter. Again, the doctrine that the minority ought to submit to the will of the majority proceeds not upon the principle that government is formed by voluntary association and for an agreed purpose on the part of all who contribute to its support, but upon the presumption that all government must be practically a state of war and plunder between opposing parties, and that in order to save blood and prevent mutual extermination, the parties come to an agreement that they will count their respective numbers periodically, and the one party shall then be permitted quietly to rule and plunder, restrained only by their own discretion, and the other submit quietly to be ruled and plundered until the time of the next enumeration. Which that's his term for voting. I love it, for elections. It's just an enumeration. All right, let everyone line up. So what we're seeing in that context, that's Bill Maher. He sees he can see which way the wind is blowing, and so he's like, yeah, right now the Republicans are definitely have the wind at their backs. So it makes more sense to be cozying up to them, and especially considering the fact that they've cozied up to me. But that's all you end up having is warring factions, and like to Spooner's point, that's not a sane way to maintain freedom at all, and yet that's what people think is the only way to maintain freedom, is through a majority rule system. It's utterly absurd.
So let's round this into a closing on that point. And that is, we could do entire shows on this, and we probably will in the future, this one little section, but you kind of took us there, which is, in my notes, I had called it, so we've got the dirty break on the left that I would argue is basically we're watching the sonic boom. We're watching the aftermath of, we're watching the recognition by the establishment Democrats that a dirty break has occurred.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like they hit the iceberg some time ago. They just found how deep the water is in the engine room, and they're like, what do we do? Can we patch this up? Can we keep this ship afloat? Do we rebrand the ship? Do we jump onto the ship of the people that hit us with the torpedo? Or do we go over on that other big ship that's the Republicans, and together we can fend off MAGA and treat MAGA as if it is a DSA? Because make no mistake, and you heard it here first, if Trump executes the acceleration plan well, here's what I would expect to play out next. By next, I mean 6 months, a year, who knows? But midterms should be an accelerant for this. We're going to see the GOP start to publicly turn on MAGA. And I don't mean a couple of senators and a couple of GOP in the House. I mean the institution is going to start talking about the problem of MAGA like they were circa 2015 and 16, before they were like, shut up, ride this out, boys. John and I call that hibernation theory.
Mm-hmm.
The advantage of Trump appealing to Sun Tzu and appearing weak when he is often very strong and much stronger than people think he is on an actual level, and I would argue on a rhetorical level, on a mass psychological level, I do think he has more support than people think. Because I think the government has less support than people think, including the establishment Republican Party. By the way, apathy toward politics is support for Donald Trump. That's one of the things John argues, and I would agree with that. People that have quit politics are MAGA. They just don't know it.
Yep.
And they're pro-Trump. They're helping Trump's agenda. So I would guess you are going to start to see some of these Dem versus DSA type of narrative deployments coming out of the GOP, because they are going to sense an opportunity at the midterms. A political opportunity, obviously, but also a narrative opportunity to try to bury Trump like they tried to bury him in 2022 and say, look, the Iran war is unpopular, energy prices are high, the economy is not where MAGA thought it was. Even the Q community that loved him and called him like a messiah, they don't even like what he's doing right now. I'm saying the establishment, that's what they think of Q people and truthers as, right? They sense blood in the water. I would argue that Donald Trump is very good at chumming the water and making it seem like he's the one who's bleeding out. So that's kind of what I would expect to see. But that brings me kind of to our closing here, where you can respond to that. But also, in my notes, I wrote this term down, the sovereign break. And in our back and forth before the show, we talked about power to the people and the infamous Trump speech in 2017. We see this dirty break on the left. We're maybe projecting something similar on the right that's on the horizon. Do you think that the age of Trump, that this was part of the engineering, that this was a logical end state and this is part of the plan? And do you think it's a necessary thing for the future? If we're looking at kind of a macro dirty break that I guess I would describe as a break from the American people from their government as being something that inherently represents their will. Small question.
Yeah. Really quickly.
Yep.
It's okay. So in
Doesn't
regards,
have to be quick.
Yeah. Well, in regards to the your prediction, I think that's that's just as good as a theory as any other, and probably better, which kind of ties into the scenario that Ash and I came up with for the trial by jury experience at Deadwood. I think this would be an act of complete disconnect from reality if the Republican establishment helps the Democrats steal the election in the midterms so that the Democrats win, because in their own twisted sense, they could be like, look, MAGA caused a blue wave. And, look what's happened. We've got to distance ourselves. We want to get back into power and really fight for conservative values. Republican values. Then we need to tone down the MAGA. I could easily see that being which I think would ultimately be from a first principles standpoint, not from an election winning standpoint, because I don't care about that,
Yeah,
but from an actual capture the culture standpoint, I think that would be, shooting themselves not just in the foot, but right in the head. I think that would be metaphorically, people, not physical. In regards to the dirty break of Americans from their government, I have argued this for a while that should happen. Basically, on each generation needs to do that, and really, it's a daily process, because this goes back to perspectives on what government should be. Government is an amplification of the power of the individual, not the authority. We as individuals have the authority to resist tyranny, and tyranny could be your neighbor steals something from you. We have, under natural law, we have the authority to exact justice for ourselves. We recognize that as broken, fallen human beings, we tend to take it too far, and then ourselves get into the realm of actually doing injustice in exacting justice. That's why Proverbs talks about there's safety in a number of counselors, getting multiple people's opinions on something. That's the whole point of the trial by jury concept, is dispersing the decision power, even though the authority is yours individually, dispersing that amongst other people so that you don't err. In fact, you almost err on the side of exacting too little justice than exacting too much, because at that point you're actually being unjust. That has to happen on an individual level on a daily basis. So as far as like a larger scale dirty break from the government, that absolutely needs to happen. We need to stop with the fanciful idea that somehow pieces of paper are going to save us. It's to invoke Spooner again. Words don't create ideas; they merely recall them. Writing things down is beneficial to some degree. I think there's a large part writing down our rights and writing down this system of government, so to speak, created a sense of complacency with people where they thought that, oh, we're good, we got it solved, it's written down. Because very quickly after all that stuff was ratified, all the things that we were afraid of happening started happening, like immediately. And I've tracked specifically in regards to trial by jury, but then going back to a lot of the founders were afraid of a judiciary being a source of predation by the government, and it's absolutely turned out into being that way. And that started happening within the first generation. So like all of the things the anti-federalists were afraid of, end up coming true, which, going back to Spooner, you can infer the design of a thing by its effect. That's another way.
Some of them were saying this as they left the building.
Yeah, exactly.
By the way,
inferring the design by the effect is the same thing Jesus says that, by their fruit you shall know them, kind of thing. So a dirty break has to happen on an individual level, on a daily basis, on a generational level, and it will necessarily happen. To invoke the pressure washer again. Once you start on your driveway, you got to finish. Once you start on first principles, and you don't recoil at the abolish the Senate to sort of tie a bow on that. You don't recoil at that. You go, well, let's talk about that. What would be the reason behind abolishing this? Why do we have a Senate? What is the purpose of government? What is the purpose of the branches? And you start just asking those questions, and then invariably, because kind of like a drain, eventually you funnel back down into those core principles of consent of the governed. Well, what does consent mean? Consent isn't something that can be done corporately. It has to be done individually. And what does that mean? And just on and on and on. And that's what I'm here for. That's talking about Badlands being the forum in which the difficult conversations can be had. To Ash's quote at the beginning of the intro there, which is such a great quote. These things need to be talked about. They need to be internalized, and people need to grow up. This is really just growing up. I've thought about this a lot in the last 10 years. The way we are going, and going can encompass all kinds of things, just culturally, financially, spiritually, etc., politically. It can't last forever. That tension is
we all
going
kind of have
to
that sense.
Yeah. It has to get catharsis, and which is grounding, but it can either actually ground back to first principles, back to God, or it can short circuit. And we have And this the tale of human history is one short-circuiting event after another, because unfortunately the people are retarded, and we keep falling for the stupid political ads. We keep falling for those stupid isms that people, use to manipulate and control. And the next trauma event, people, because we're broken people, we're going to make mistakes. We have to extend grace in that, but we have to do this. Otherwise, I said it before, we're screwed. Doesn't mean I would stop saying what I think is true. You brought up Q and the consensus forming thing, and I've believed this stuff for like almost 20 years. Like, I've been very, very consistent. I understand it way deeper than I did 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. But when the Q stuff came around, I was excited about it, and I still think there's positives there. But one of the things that concerned me about it was that it's like, this is the fundamental ideology underneath this stuff is statism. And the fruit of it is that the people that are the most
powerful people are coming to save you from another group of powerful people,
and vote
power back to you means voting for me to represent you.
And the people that are pushing Q the hardest are fundamentally ideologically statists.
The worst people on the internet too.
And I can have a conversation with those people, but I don't get first principles responses to the things I'm bringing up. They get brushed aside. It's like, well, you didn't actually answer my point. So if we're going to have a dirty break from government, which is the logical end of everything that we talk about on Badlands, ultimately, then, let's get the party started. And you don't have to get muskets and F-15s. You just stop consenting. You stop participating voluntarily in a system that is inherently unnatural.
The wait list for F-15s is absurd. Like, I'm somewhere. I checked the queue recently, and I'm like, I'm behind Turkey right now. Israel's got a whole bunch they're going to be getting, so it's just a real disaster. Those trying bastards. To just get on the pre-order list. All right, man, this was a fun one. I think the people enjoyed it. If you guys did, if you felt challenged by it in a good way, if you feel like we convinced you to embrace the dirty break, that dirty break that's going on the left, to want one on the right, and maybe even to want a third one beyond that, I also saved some of these notes. Next time you're on the narrative, I want to have a whole discussion on what we ended on, which is this idea of a sovereign break, a dirty break from the government, and connected to this concept. Chris Paul has done a lot of writing on this in terms of Donald Trump. I've done some writing on this, but this I call it sovereign prime, this concept of what Trump has really grown to represent to me. And you and I, often in our private discussions, relate that to Aragorn as an analog.
Yeah, we didn't really get
we
too
don't
much
necessarily
into Lord
have
of
to
the Rings.
say Jesus, because that makes people upset, because we're not calling Trump a messiah. But in terms of Aragorn, it is too perfect an analog between what Trump could represent and what his net effects could be, and what Aragorn's net effects were and intent perhaps was. So I think we should do a whole episode on that next time. The sovereign break, sovereign prime. How can a king somehow provoke people into self-actualizing? Because I think that's exactly the story of Aragorn. And I think that could be the story of Donald Trump. That's certainly the story of Trump that I want to help actualize.
There's a lot of markers that point it in that direction, for sure.
Damn straight. All right, man. Otherwise, let me just grab, I got a rant here and a boost. Tom Terrific sent $25 over for the cause. Thank you, Tom. And there was a couple of boosts I saw. Awaken Mass sent 25 over. Thanks for all you do and for being so optimistic about things. We would love for you to come to another meetup. Can I try to coordinate something with Mrs. BB for the fall? Man, I can't even, she couldn't even tell you when we're going to be around. I'll just tell you, if you do one in Plymouth, that's probably like the only area we're going to be able to go to a meetup. And if you do kind of put something on the books or just float it, I can let you know if it definitely won't work. But thanks for the support. Carrying the Fire. Great show last week. If Eric has a correct view on China, then I have to believe that Bannon is not the good guy I hoped he was. He's brilliant. No way he really holds the views he has on China legitimately. I can't help but draw this conclusion. I don't know where to go with Bannon. I like Bannon sometimes. I agree on that framing. I don't agree with the framing of China, but I think he also speaks to the multiple audiences type of thing. kind of depends what you mean when you say China, what you mean when you say the CCP.
Mm-hmm.
So I can extend that and say I comfortably and confidently do not know what the man's narrative intentions are. Otherwise, guys, next week on The Narrative, I will be joined, I believe, by Lieutenant General Steve Quast. We're going to have he hasn't been on the show for a while, so we're going to have a fun discussion on probably some of this AI stuff, some of this nuclear stuff, some of the actuals that I feel like have actually just been like quietly accelerating under the surface while everybody argues about fake wars the whole time. Meanwhile, there's just like data centers and nuclear centers just going nuts. So that should be a fun one. What do you got going on, Drake?
Well, I'll be back on No Treason next Sunday. We're working our way through the Science of Justice essay, which I mentioned tonight on my show. It's turning into one of my favorite series I've done so far. It was an essay he wrote at the end of his life that was kind of a all in one place distillation of his ideas on natural law and justice, of it being a science, meaning it's discoverable. It's as natural as the movement of the stars, which means you can study it, you can learn it, and it's been absolutely fascinating going through that. I just go section by section. It's kind of like if people are familiar with like expository preaching, where people go verse by verse through a book of the Bible or something. I'm just kind of going verse by verse through Spooner and just finding depths of wisdom that I didn't necessarily see before, and actually making the case that he's not an anarchist, and neither am I. Actually, there is a solid case for legitimate government, and of course, it's just a very short list of what actually counts as a legitimate government. But yeah, that, and then Ash and I are talking about trying to do a show in the fall analyzing SCOTUS. So I'm kind of doing some back end preparations on that kind of thing, trying to put together some research tools and whatnot. But that should start in October. But yeah, it's kind of like joking about not having enough time in the day. Like there's just so much stuff to read and digest, and plus be
the only way out
husband.
is through.
Yeah.
Every day I basically wake up and go to sleep with the only way out is through.
Well,
we're all gonna die sometime.
to that, that became my life motto when I had a 99 Toyota Tacoma that I bought knowing that it had a bad spot in the frame. I may have told you this story before, but like that, I thought it was just like a short section that I could weld and fix. And I got it in my shop. I took the cab completely off. I took the bed completely off so I could get all the rust knocked down. And as I'm like knocking the rust, stuff that sounded solid when I went to buy it started crumbling and falling apart. And then after about an hour, my floor of my garage was completely covered in rust. And I had like one of the few panic attacks I've had in my life. And I sat there for like an hour and just stared at it. And I was like, no way out but through. And I ended up just rebuilding the entire frame.
Built a truck.
Built the frame. And it took me 3 months to the day of doing like 16-hour days. Like I'd go to work for 12 hours, come home, work for like 4 or 5 hours, sleep, get up, work on it, then go to work. On my day,
then you got in an accident on day 91.
No, I drove it for 5 years and then I sold it to an idiot teenager. So it worked out.
Nice.
But yeah, anyway. So yeah, lots of life going on. No way out but through. And yeah.
Good stuff, guys. All right, your challenge for this week is to wake up every day, and when you see yourself in the mirror, you say, I am not a Republican. I am not a Republican. And that's what I want you guys to work on. I know most of you are maybe there, maybe not most of you, but a lot of you are there, and we'll get there. You can say you're a Badlander, though. That's a good thing to be.
If only we could get Ghost. If we could get Ghost to just stop being Republican.
Yeah, right.
He was at the chat. He's like, the worst part about admitting you're Republican is telling your dad you're gay.
Oh, that kid. We certainly let him out of the bottle. He always had it in him, but sometimes I wonder what we've helped to create, or at least foment. He was already creating himself in that vein, but I think we encouraged it. We accelerated it.
Accelerate.
All right, guys. You will see me. When will you see me? Wednesday night on DPH. Thursday night on Badlands Story Hour. We are doing. What are we doing? What's the movie? Mercy, the AI sort of movie with Chris Pratt and Rebecca Ferguson about future crime and predictive programming and all that kind of stuff. So that should be an interesting one.
You guys have been on a good streak.
Yeah, it's been some fun ones lately. And otherwise, if you guys want, go to badlands.substack.com. Myself, Ash, and Ghost are working on that 5-6 days a week. The brief comes out Monday through Friday morning. It's a great table setter. You can see all of Ghost's rants. If you think his rants on the shows are something, you should see his rants in the brief. And then the Blitz comes out Saturday mornings. And Ghost and I just recorded one this past week on Colombian hobbits, MAGA ants, and the global golden age. And yes, we did actually talk about that. So, Drake's jealous that we talked about some Lord of the Rings.
We didn't get enough Lord of the Rings tonight. That's
yeah, we're doing that next time. I'm making a note that we are strongly Aragorn maxing next time you're on the show. Otherwise, guys, I'll let Drake go. And then, as I always say, the war is a story. The story is a war. Act accordingly. I'll see you next week. Oops. Let me continue to mangle the ending here by removing myself on YouTube so I don't get copyright struck. See, this is what Jess always does that stuff. And I was like, I'll do it myself this time because I'm a grown adult man and I can press these buttons in the correct order as well as any woman can that basically pilots this show invisibly in the shadows. And instead I just ruined the entire outro, probably broke something on the back end, but I think did manage to successfully do the thing I was going to do. So we can all just forget the last 1 minute happened. As I always say, the war is a story. The story is a war. Act accordingly.